I think we all have these future plans. And then I think sometimes, to me, it's all about finding your own way forward, finding what your own uh, inner work tells you, your inner values, your principles, your deep principles, what that really is all about, and acting upon those. Joseph Campbell too, he said, follow your bliss. So basically find out, don't worry about the money, right? Don't worry about getting a PhD. Just follow your bliss, which he did in his life. And he became the foremost expert on mythology.
This podcast episode is brought to you by the Inner Circle, your place to learn astrology in community with the masters and transform your life in the process.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. I am so grateful that you've decided to join us here today. And my guess is that you have been following along on this house series that we've been doing. We are now today on the 11th house. And no worries if you've missed the other houses, they are available for you to watch on the Astrology Hub podcast, watch or listen, depending on which platform you connect with us on. So you're welcome to check that out after this episode. But I highly recommend that you just hang out and absorb what you can about the 11th house here today. And we have an 11th house expert, 11th house connoisseur, so to speak. And this is Henry Seltzer. And a little bit about Henry. He has a graduate degree in linguistics. He has studied computer science and attended MIT as an undergraduate, but his real study has become astrology and tarot. Henry's journey with astrology began with an interest in Jungian psychological symbolism in 1975. He's a seasoned astrologer, author, and sought-after speaker, and he also created the popular astrology software Time Passages, and he wrote its acclaimed interpretations. So Henry is another living legend in the field of astrology that is here with us as a part of this house series. He's also going to be an Inner Circle astrologer with us in 2023, which we're super excited about. And let's dive into the 11th house, Henry. Before we started recording, you said, I love the 11th house. I'm happy I have the 11th house. Why do you love the 11th house?
Well, it's kind of my story. The 11th house, it's hard to say why it's my story without going into the meaning of it. And we're going to be discussing the meaning of it. But let's just say that I am very happy that I actualized in my life to be able to bring astrology to people as a way of seeing how that could be even a fundamental building block for a social evolution that's so important in this 21st century as we try to get somewhere.
I love it. Okay, well, let's dive in. What is the 11th house all about?
Well, now, traditionally, they say wishes and hopes, and that's just, of course, a glimmer. But really, I think the best way to look at it is to look at it as the way your creativity, which is represented in the 5th house, which is creative self-expression and joy, and where you have your projects, so to speak. And then what is the result of that activity is the question mark. So, that's where the 11th house comes in. It's actually, I call it societal contribution. I call it future plans as well. They say that it has to do with trying to see the future direction of what you yourself are up to as you come into the 10th house, which is, of course, your social prominence. When you go through what you go through to mature and to find your place and to find your niche and to see what you can accomplish. And then, that the 10th house is associated with status and kind of income as a public figure, public persona. But then what are you going to do with it? Where does that go? Where does that enter into the social good? Because I believe that we're all here not only to grow personally and individually, but also to be of service to the great cultural evolution of our times, you might say. And that's where it really comes in. The 11th house to me is all about that societal evolution, which is kind of the breath of life. That's why we're here in a sense.
No. So Henry, would you say that the 10th house as being the place where you experience success or cultivate success in your life in terms of your career or your work, then it's like, what are you going to do with that success? How are you going to almost pay it forward in a way? And
That's a
that's
very
where
good
the
way.
house comes in.
Pay it forward is a very good way to put it.
Okay. Now, what's the relation? Yeah, let's go into it a little bit more. The relationship between the 11th house and the 10th house, and also what it means if you do or you don't have planets in the 11th house. Does that mean you have nothing to contribute to the societal good if you don't have planets there? And if you do have planets there, how do you interpret that?
Well, of course, it depends on the planet. And of course, not having planets is still okay. What we always say there in terms of traditional astrology, the way we work, is that you look to the ruler of the 11th house as well. So you would want to see how that lines up with your sun degree, perhaps with other planets in your chart. And then you would look to, as you commented about the planets being located in that house, depending on the planet, that's kind of what you bring to that placement. You might might have the sun there. So it might be a really important fundamental part of what you're up to. It turns out if you have the new planet Eris beyond Pluto, if you have that in a particular house, it really lights up that house in terms of soul intention. So that's another way of looking at it. When I wrote The 10th Planet, which is the book about Eris that I did this cookbook section at the end, and I had no idea the impact it was going to have. But by putting the house together with the idea of becoming your soul purpose, which is Eris is about a feminine warrior for soul intention, it just really lit up the whole idea of the house, and people love them. They just identify with it. They say, that's me.
So Eris, spelled Eris, right?
Right.
Eris. Okay. And if you have Eris in the 11th house, it's particularly charged, is what you're saying. It's particularly potent. But that would be true about wherever Eris falls in your chart, right?
That's right. Whichever house, it really illuminates that house. That was a great lesson for me when I was doing that research.
Okay, let's say you're wanting to place a focus on your 11th house, and you either do or you don't have planets there, and you've looked at the house cusp and you know which sign is on the house cusp. So you know that that's sort of coloring the 11th house for you.
Absolutely.
Is that the right way to say it?
Well, and also I think it's important to look at the ruler of that house. So, you know by the sign, if it's Leo, the ruler is the sun. If it's Cancer, the ruler the moon. If it's Taurus or Libra, and I believe that's Venus, and I believe that if it's Scorpio or Aries, it's Mars, because that's the traditional ruler of Scorpio. I think that works pretty well. And then usually if it's Aquarius, I say Uranus is the ruler. And so that you would look to see where Uranus lies and how that connects. If you happen to have the sun conjunct the ruler, whatever the ruler might be, that brings a lot of oomph to that house also, just like if you had planets there.
Oh.
And you also want to consider the nature of the planet. Like if you have Venus there, you're a lover of that kind of energy of the 11th house. You might be a support of people that are working in that way. If you have Mars there, it's more like you're the doer making that happen. If you're Jupiter, then you celebrate it. You have a lot of positive associations with it. It's where you find your joy, etc.
Okay. If you wanted to use the 11th house as a compass for creating future plans. So you have this career, maybe you're experiencing some success with it, and or you want to set yourself up to contribute societally from the beginning. Maybe you're starting a new career, maybe you're engaged in some work already, and you're feeling the need or the call to pay it forward, to contribute in some way. How do you use the 11th house as a barometer of how to create those future plans, or where to direct your energy or where to direct your resources?
Well, one obvious way is when by progression or by transit, a planet goes through there. Like if the moon happens to be in the 11th house, which it spends, 2.5 days there every single month, that would be a time, just pay attention to that, oh, the moon is going through my 11th house. Let me, and then the moon, it's a very subtle thing. It's kind of more like what underlies pure logic. It's more like a direct apprehension from your soul level, or at least from your unconscious part of yourself, the part that you can't always figure everything out. When you start thinking logically and making lists and all that doesn't do the entire job. You really need a little bit that intuitional part of yourself, And to me, when the moon is going through there is a really good time to try to tune into that, to where you might be unsuspecting of what you might actually wind up doing, but it comes to you. Or same as if you happen to have Uranus coming through there, or a good example is this eclipse that's coming up on November 8th. If that happens, if that eclipse moon with Uranus right there with it happens to land in your 11th house, and of course that won't be true of everybody at all, but I think that's a very good time, and that's why when we do the kind of sun sign astrology, we might say, well, gee, if Taurus is going to be in your 11th house, that's somebody that has probably Cancer on the ascendant if you do whole signs. And so you could go through it that way. So if you're a Cancer person, sign of Cancer, you might very well have a huge inspiration coming along on November 8th when that eclipse lights up your whole house representation of the 11th.
A lot of people are curious about Pluto in the 11th house. What does it mean if you have Pluto there?
Well, for one thing, Pluto in the 10th is very famous for career change. You go through a bunch of careers, you might get to a position of prominence and get knocked down. And, the typical thing is, I was fired yesterday. It's the worst day of my life. I don't know what I'm going to do. Where am I going to get my money from? 6 years later, you're talking to the same person and you say, what about your past 6 years? And they say, oh my God, the day I was fired was the best day of my life. Right. So similarly, I believe with the 11th house, it would be, you go through a lot of changes there. In other words, it's not clear. Well, for one thing, I didn't mention it earlier, but of course, the 11th house is associated with friendships and groups and your societal connection as well as your societal contribution. So, and that becomes also interestingly, in the 5th house and the early houses, you're more of an individualist, and the 5th house is opposite the 11th. And it's like a yin yang symbol where you have that dot of the white in the midst of the black, so it does relate, that the two opposite houses do relate. So you take your individualism and then it transforms into more of a social contribution where it could be almost that the society is choosing you as its spokesperson and it's acting through you to create what needs to be created. So in that sense, your connections, your associations become important. You learn so much from other souls, other people that you talk to. It's amazing what a difference it makes when you're in a dedicated group or when you do have a mentor that's helping you establish yourself, and you get that kind of feeling from other people too, and your own contribution to it, how you relate to other people does affect the way you see yourself moving forward. And so that in that way, you're kind of participating in the society. So I started to say that because friendships and groups are associated with the 11th house, with Pluto there, you might very well have big changes all the time. So in other words, now I'm with this group. I used to be with that group, but that's over. Now I'm with this group or this next group. So you go through a lot of changes, maybe friends as well. So it keeps illuminating, and it also changes you. They think that's the planet of transformation. And so your transformation partly would come from as you get feedback from what you're up to and how that helps or hinders the social evolution.
So Pluto natally in your chart in the 11th house
Right.
may signify that you're going to go through a lot of changes periodically around your friends and your societal connections.
And you wouldn't say just randomly. You'd say that there was sort of an evolution happening there where, you're the type of person that just has to go through stages and stages and leave that behind and keep transforming in that way.
Yes. And then if Pluto is transiting your 11th house, that may signify another transformative change, but it actually may feel a little more sudden and out of nowhere than if you natally have Pluto in your chart.
So much happens depending on if you have that faith in the universe. When Pluto comes along, it feels like the wrecking ball, and you have a tendency, some people are pessimistic and have a tendency to say, oh, my life is over, it's ruined, everything's terrible. And then there's another way to look at it, that maybe everything's for purpose, or this could be helping me in another way. And I didn't even realize that was the change I needed to have to get to the place that I've gotten to eventually as a result.
Do you feel like we can trust that Plutonian energy to always be pushing us towards our higher evolution?
Yes, I do.
That's reassuring. Thank you. All right. What about patterning between the 3rd, 7th, and 11th house? Those all have something in common, correct?
They're the air houses. I mean, it's similar to the elements, And if you think about it, they're all relational houses. Obviously the seventh is your relationship with your partner, usually or a business partner. It could be just deep friendships. The third is siblings and also communication in general. As you first get started with the idea that there's somebody out there and you can talk to them. Amazing. And then the 11th takes it to another level of this group association, friendships and the way you relate to the society.
Whenever I've been learning about the houses and they say the 11th house is friendship and community, it feels nebulous to me. I'm kind of like, what does that mean? It's about friendship and community. Does that mean if you have a lot of planets there, you're going to be a person with a lot of friends and a big community? Or, it doesn't feel as concrete maybe as some of the other houses. And it feels a little bit harder to apply.
Well, I think that's only part of the story. Yes, friendships, group associations, they say wishes and hopes as well, plans for the future, where you want to see yourself going. But really, it's the next stage of a process. The 12 signs, similarly to the 12 houses, are a cycle of 12 unfolding stages of life. And what you're doing, I love what Rudyard says about the 11th house. He says that is where you're forming the seed of the next social movement, could be. I mean, or it could be the seed of your own next. It could be where you're planting the seeds that are eventually going to become your next stage as well. You go through these stages. That's an advanced stage. You've gotten to a point where you're, if you think about it in terms of the agriculture, it's not just the initial inception of the thing and then the flowering of that plant. It's also the seed. At that point, it's the seed that comes to make the next plant.
What I love about this and just the cosmic curriculum in general is that it helps us stay balanced and it helps us look through many different lenses as we are going through life and make sure that we don't forget about certain things. Like it's not just about your individual success or your individual expression, that it's equally important to then be thinking, how can I share this gift? How can this gift contribute to a better world? And the 11th house, sounds to me, from what you're saying, is that's what the 11th house is all about.
I think so too. Yeah, I really do. Yeah.
You are one of, I think maybe the only astrologer who has done the amount of research that you've done on Eris as a newer energy in our cosmology. And specifically, if someone looks at their chart and sees, I want to see where my Eris is. If it's landing in the 11th house, what does that specifically mean? And then can you please just give a brief overview of the Eris energy? I know you referred to it a little bit earlier, but just a little bit more on what Eris is and then what it means if you have Eris in the 11th house.
Well, as I said, when I first did Years in the Houses, because I decided to do a cookbook section. I mean, I guess to condense a big story into a few words, I imagined that Eris was going to be important because it was the same category as Pluto. When Mike Brown, the astronomer, discovered Eris, he went, "Oh my God, it's bigger than Pluto. It's brighter than Pluto. It's probably not diameter-wise very different from Pluto, but it is more dense and brighter and so much further out. So that if the telescope had been invented 250 years sooner, we would have found Eris first. It's a 550-year orbit. So it's the furthest. I mean, it's at its aphelion, which is the furthest point. And that's why it moves so slowly through Aries, taking from 1920 until 2040, 120 years ago, just through Aries. But that's because that is the farthest point of its orbit when it's moving the slowest. And then, of course, it moves faster when it gets closer to the sun. It moves about the same as Pluto when it gets 20 years or so per sign, when it gets to the 250 years from now, when it gets to the part that's closer, the opposite to Libra, to Libra. But having done that and seeing it as a feminine warrior, because it was the sister of the god of war in Greek mythology, I began to see that a feminine warrior is after something different than a masculine warrior, just a normal concept of a warrior who might be fighting for advantage, for territory, for ego. I can beat you up. I'm bigger than you, and whatever, for the king, for money, for power. But a feminine warrior, I realized at some point, is really fighting for what is deep need. What is the absolute fundamental? And similar to nature, where a tiger might, a female tiger might kill a deer, and we don't go, bad tiger, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have killed that deer. We go, well, it's part of the cycle of life that the tiger is feeding its young, and it has to have meat for its family. So, I mean, you think of it, or I think of it sometimes. I used to say a mother might be cutting bread with a sharp knife, and all of a sudden there's an intruder and the life of her child is threatened. She might use the knife, but it's not like she's this bloodthirsty woman waving a knife around all the time. It's just that was the need at the moment that was a deep need. So I got to that, and then I started researching feminists, and all the feminists I could find have strong Eris in their charts. I was like, am I going to find a chart one of these days of a feminist that doesn't have a strong Eris? I was like, and so I began to formulate this idea that it was pretty important as Pluto in charts, and it does seem to be. And then the proof of that is any planet that Eris touches is a very important planet in the chart. If I see Eris with Mercury, they're a writer, almost invariably, or they have thought about it and they could be. Anyway, the house also, I realized, was very important. So I did these little portraits of Eris in this particular house for my cookbook section. And I found to my surprise that people really, really related to them and said, oh my God, that's me. That describes me. So if you want, I can read the one. Should I read the one for the 11th? So it gives us a good idea about the 11th. In each of these, I really combined the understanding of the house with the understanding of just soul purpose, soul intention. And it's really what you have to come to. It's like your soul intention is not something obvious because our early conditioning doesn't always lead us in the right direction, right? And our early conditioning and early trauma as well could lead us away from, we may be afraid to do what we really are meant to do until we work through some of those things. So I found that really it does speak to kind of what is really important at a soul level. And that's what people have been relating to. I get so many positive feedbacks from this. Eris in the 11th. You are fascinated by society. And from a definite remove, you have an unstoppable drive to find a better social setup for you to fit yourself into, even though what currently exists seems to never entirely fill the bill. What really counts for you is your individually unique idea of a future that you can really live with, and that you feel you could also support the best intentions of the people to whom you are drawn. You have your own way of seeing things. You follow the beat of that distant drummer, a siren song that moves you greatly and that derives from a voice inside you that is distinctly your own. Even though your concept is formed on the basis of what you glean from your surroundings, the current social system is not your target because your vision tends to be several steps ahead of it. When you're ready to reveal your mature concept, you might find it a better match for what has to come next in terms of social progress than ever you would have imagined. As you get closer to knowing your truth, that you feel the great and abiding need to share with your fellow humans, you come to better know yourself at deep levels. The slow cooker of your process has really followed nothing else all along other than the promptings of your own inner compass. And yet this work eventually becomes, to your surprise, at least one part of a comprehensive roadmap for the world. You could thus turn out to have tremendous impact on the society that you've run up against during the entire course of your years of development.
Wow.
You like that?
Definitely a powerful placement. The thing that really stuck out for me is that their vision, it doesn't even fit within the framework of what's happening currently, that they're so far ahead in terms of what they can see where it needs to go, that my guess is some people may think that their idea is crazy or that their vision is unrealistic or just impossible because most people are stuck at the current level of consciousness that created the situation we're in right now.
Exactly.
But this seems, far out in the future in terms of what's possible.
I think that's the message is that we have to evolve. I mean, as individuals and as a society. Richard says at one point that we're turning a circle into a spiral. Because basically, if you go around in the same circle and the same circle and the same circle and the same circle, that's where you get kind of calcified and locked up. And, you have to take it to the next level.
Isn't that true with the way that we're moving through space? That we're literally spiraling through space?
That is true.
Yeah, that's
Very
so
good.
cool. We should be matching that movement for sure.
Guess so.
Yeah. What is the 11th house good for in an astrological forecast? What is it helpful in predicting?
Well, I mean, I call it future plans usually. In other words, I think we all have these future plans. And then I think sometimes, to me, it's all about finding your own way forward, finding what your own uh, inner work tells you, your inner values, your principles, your deep principles, what that really is all about, and acting upon those. Joseph Campbell too, he said, follow your bliss. So basically find out, don't worry about the money, right? Don't worry about getting a PhD. Just follow your bliss, which he did in his life. And he became the foremost expert on mythology, and started teaching it. And then he read and read and read, getting ready for that. But so I think you're right when you say you don't know exactly what that future of yours is until you kind of feel your way into it. And it's not something you can, well, especially when you're coming from that standpoint of consensus thinking, it's not where you can really apply yourself. It's where it comes from deep inside yourself, independent. I always say this: independent of consensus thinking, independent of early conditioning, independent of your fears about, well, I couldn't possibly be that great.
What does it mean when you have a lot of energy or planets in the 11th house? And what does it mean if you don't have any energy or planets in the 11th house?
Well, I think, yes, if you have a concentration of energy there, I do think you're kind of a future oriented individual. You're always seeing the possibilities. That's what I think. And, that does fit in with Uranus too. Uranus is the natural ruler of Aquarius, which is associated with the 11th sign being associated with the 11th house. So again, it's innovation, moving forward, seeing the possibilities, being more interested in where things could go than where things are at. It's like being a progressive, I guess, a person usually wanting to see things change for the better because life has changed. We can't we just can't ignore the fact that it's always changing. As much as we might think that we want to keep everything as it is, going to change.
They're the ones that are helping us forge ahead.
I think so.
Yeah. And conversely, if someone has no planets in the 11th house, does that mean that's not part of their path or not as much of an emphasis on their path?
I would say not as much of an emphasis, although again, the ruler, you can look at that and see how that's placed. And you can see connections between the 11th house by the placement of the ruler and some other house. So you can see how it might be a factor for the person. I mean, everybody's got some sense of the future, but for some people, it's more important to just dig the present. They might be more like the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings. They're just very happy to be sitting in their little bungalow and enjoying their life until, Gandalf comes around. And then
Or watching the Lord of the Rings, like, oh my gosh, I want to go live there. That looks so nice.
the Hobbit town.
Yes. I think I asked you this, but I kind of want to ask you again because I don't feel like I get it. Okay. So when you say the 11th house is for future plans, so we've talked about it being about societal contribution, friends and community, hopes and wishes, but also this idea of future plans. What does that mean? Does that mean that your ideas for your future are encapsulated in that 11th house, or that when something's transiting your 11th house, that ideas for your future will come? Like, what does that actually mean?
I think it does mean all those things. And I think it does, the most simplistic way of looking at it, they have associations with all the houses. It means these kind of just normal kind of parts of your life. And one of the things they say about the 11th is wishes and hopes, which is one way of looking at, because I don't think there's a person really that doesn't have some kind of a vision of, I'd like things to be better in this way or that way. And then when you recognize that what you're really doing, what you're really about is helping the whole society, you feel that way about the society. It almost is a given, isn't it? Of course, it's such a given in these days. In these days, we can see very clearly there's some fundamental issues racism, this income inequality thing. I mean, we've got to make some balance. There's things that have gotten out of proportion or unbalanced, and they really have to be addressed. I mean, I think we just have to be heading for more of a globalistic, pluralistic society where diversity can be contributing instead of seen as a problem. So I think it's so important. And this election is so important that's coming up in the US, but I mean, not to get political with it, but, just I think everybody always sees where things could be better and they want that for themselves. And then to see that as part of the social evolution that's necessary and to see how what you're doing fits into the larger pattern of the whole society, I think is important. I think that's where it becomes more of a, more of a calling really. And also when you say future, it's more of a future. Well, it is always future. I mean, we're always looking ahead, right? I mean, we don't want to go into the past, right? We don't want to go back. Some people do, but that's probably not so healthy.
If someone wants to start working tangibly with their 11th house placements right now, what would you suggest? What would be first or next step?
Well, I think each planet can be looked at in a more simplistic way and then also in a deeper way. So I would say to tune into the deeper meaning, like Saturn, for example. Saturn can be seen as limitation. And then there's that great book by Liz Green called A New Look at an Old Devil, right? In other words, look at the bright side of Saturn, which is really, I found in my research with Eris that Saturn does represent the kind of social contract, and the real beauty of the social contract is where everybody's protected by society, where people that are disadvantaged are somehow protected and people that don't have money are somehow protected so they don't have to live on the street. And so I find that Eris and Saturn is inevitably, because it brings out, in a way, it brings out the best of the planet, the deeper side of the planet. And Eris with Saturn I found invariably to be this kind of fairness, this social fairness of defending the underdog. One person that I thought of that way was Elizabeth Warren, because, I don't know if you are tuned into her much, but I think she's really a nice person. She's coming from this place of, she was for the Consumer Protection Act and all that stuff. And she does seem to have that sense of fairness. And at one point it just dawned on me, oh my gosh, she's got to have Eris with Saturn. And so I looked at the chart and at first I couldn't see it. It wasn't very obvious. So I thought, I guess I'm not seeing it. But then I realized it was exactly 144 degrees, which is a biquintile, 72 times 2, fifth of the 2/5 of the 360. And it was within 1/10 of a degree of exact. So that was a nice little confirmation.
Okay, so take a look at the planets that you have in the 11th house. What is the deeper invitation of that planet?
Absolutely.
How does that apply to the way that you're here to contribute to society? Yeah?
Definitely. I think it's great. And I think really you could look at your life that way too. What is the deeper meaning? Try to find what it's really all about.
Absolutely. Okay. And if you have no planets there, look at the ruler of the house cusp.
Yes.
And then where does that ruler show up in your chart? And then how do those two work together? So let's say I have Leo on the house cusp of the 11th house, and my Leo is in the 6th house, for example. What does that mean? Or how do we interpret that?
So the sun in the 6th is going to be somebody that wants to be of service. They do feel a sense of, a sense of mission as well. They have a purpose, and that purpose usually involves others because it's so close to the 7th, and it's a way of saying, I want to be of service. And then when you put that together with the 11th, it's somebody that's very likely to be a service oriented person in terms of how they conceive of their own future societal involvement.
So just to correct what I said a little bit, you look and see that Leo is on the house cusp. And Leo is ruled by the sun. So then you see where the sun is in your chart.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And remember, even if you have a planet that's in Cancer, after Leo comes Virgo. So if you have Leo on the cusp, you might have planets in Virgo that are in your 11th house, but even those planets are in the 11th house, and the 11th house on the cusp is Leo. So you would still look for the sun.
And that's if you're using a house system that has intercepted houses, correct?
You
But
could have you could have an intercepted house in there too. Yeah, that's right. But it wouldn't have to be. I mean, you could have Virgo on the next cusp, but if you had like half and half Leo and then the other half Virgo in your 11th house, you still would want to look at the ruler of the house cusp. So you'd want to look to the sun in that case was Leo.
Okay, great. Henry, thank you so much. It's been so fun to explore the 11th house with you. And just in summary, some of the keywords that I took away were, again, societal contribution, future plans. What do you do with your success? How do you pay it forward? How do you contribute to societal evolution? It also is connected with your friends, your groups, your community. And it's basically what is the result of your creativity and your individual expression? How do you actually share that in order to evolve humanity, so to speak?
That's a beautiful summary.
Great. Awesome. So now you all can enjoy looking at your 11th house with this deeper level of understanding. Henry is going to be one of our teachers for the inner circle. The inner circle is not open right now, but you can definitely get on the wait list at astrologyhub.com/IC23. That is IC as in circle 23. And we will let you know as soon as registration is open. I would also recommend checking out Henry's book on Eris. And if that piques your interest, especially if you have Eris in the 11th house and you want to know more about that, I would highly recommend you check out Henry's book and also his time passages software. I mean, Henry is prolific in the field of astrology, so lots of opportunities to learn from him. And Henry, just thank you so much for being here with us on Astrology Hub and being a part of this house series. It's been so fun to connect with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, everybody, take care. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. And thank you, as always, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode.
If you've studied astrology, you're probably familiar with aspects like trines, squares, and oppositions. But did you know that there are a lot more aspects you can read in an astrological chart? In Astrology Foundations Level 3 with Master Astrologer Rick Levine, you'll learn the magic of quintiles, septiles, and other harmonic aspects. And understanding these aspects will take your understanding of astrology way beyond the ordinary, or even what you thought was possible. Rick Levine is one of the foremost thinkers on harmonic aspects, and he's going to share his mind-blowing perspective with you in Astrology Foundations Level 3. By the end of this 4-week course, plus 2 bonus weeks of live sessions with Rick, you'll get a complete overview of harmonic aspects that will change the way you look at astrology forever. Learn more and enroll today at astrologyhub.com/foundations3. Again, that's astrologyhub.com/foundations3.